That's a beautiful truck, Frank.
The truck is his, but the $60,000 debt, that's in my name.
You DAR accuse me at this table? You're a useless parasite. Get out of my house!
Can you believe it? Right at the Thanksgiving dinner table, amidst the smell of roasted turkey and the fake laughter of relatives, my father, Frank Miller, looked me dead in the eye and called me a useless freeloader. And then he threw me out of the house that I had been breaking my back to pay the mortgage on for the last 5 years. But that's not even the worst part. No, not by a long shot. The reason for his rage? It was because I had discovered a devastating secret, a betrayal of the highest order, an act that the FBI calls a serious felony. My father had secretly used my identity, my name, my future, to take out a $60,000 loan for a truck he didn't even need. Before you rush to judgment, before you think this is just another trashy family drama, let me take you back. Let me tell you about the Frank Miller I used to know. He was my idol, a god in his own home in Cleveland, Ohio. A steel plant foreman with calloused hands that could build worlds. My mother, Susan, was the embodiment of gentleness, and my little brother, Leo, was the family's hope. We were the typical American family, living the dream until reality hit. The plant closed. The dream shattered. And the pride of the man who built my world shattered right along with it. And then I, Chloe Miller, the 28-year-old daughter with a UX/UI design job he never understood, became the life raft. But that raft wasn't just for the electric and water bills. It was the mortgage, the car insurance, the mounting credit card bills. And most painfully, Leo's entire college tuition, because his savings fund had been drained by my parents long ago, over $5,000 every month. For 5 years, 70% of my income vanished into a black hole of denial and wounded pride. I told myself I was doing the right thing. I was saving my family. But I was wrong. I wasn't helping. I was enabling. In this video, I'm not holding anything back. I'm going to show you the word-for-word transcript of that explosive Thanksgiving confrontation. I will expose the sophisticated psychological manipulation that made me a prisoner in my own home. I will tell you about the betrayal that cut deeper than any knife from the very flesh and blood I worked so hard to protect. And most importantly, I will show you step by step how I hit the self-destruct button on that fake life, how I let the banks and the law do their jobs, how I coldly and methodically cut every single string. Because this isn't just a story about revenge. This is a story about liberation. Stay tuned, because you're going to want to hear the rest of this. For you to truly understand the weight of the decision I made, for you not to think I'm some heartless daughter who destroyed her family overnight, we need to go back. Back to a time when our house in Cleveland was filled with laughter instead of sighs. My father, Frank Miller, used to be the king of that world. He wasn't a CEO in a fancy suit. His world was the Republic steel plant. I can still remember the faint smell of grease and metal on his jacket every evening when he came home. It was the smell of hard work, the smell of a man who provided. The neighbors respected him. His friends, the other workers, saw him as a leader. Every Sunday, our backyard would be filled with the smoky aroma of barbecue, and my dad's laugh was the sound that guaranteed everything in the world was okay. I grew up in that absolute safety, believing the fortress named Frank Miller would never fall. But every fortress has a weakness. My father's weakness was his pride. And then, the enemy of his pride arrived. They didn't carry swords. They were robots, automated assembly lines, a new world operating by rules he refused to learn. The day the plant announced it was closing for good, a silence fell over our house. My dad didn't scream. He didn't break things. He just sat there, in his favorite armchair, his eyes glued to the TV, but his mind wasn't there. He was like a king exiled from his own kingdom. His pride had shattered into a million pieces, and the only glue he used to piece it back together was beer and bitterness. The air in the house became thick, suffocating. Every conversation had to be navigated carefully, avoiding the topic of work, avoiding the topic of the future. And that's when my role began to change. It didn't happen all at once. It came on slowly, like a subtle poison. First, it was from my mom, Susan. She came to me with swollen eyes. "Chloe, honey, the electric bill is a little high this month. Can you help your dad and me out? Your father is so down, I don't want him to worry anymore." Of course, I agreed. It was just a little help. Then the next month, it was the car insurance. The month after that, the minimum payment on the credit card. Each time, my mother would be the one to ask, with a sympathetic reason and a promise that, "It's just temporary, honey, until your dad finds a new job." The real turning point, the moment I went from helper to hostage, was on an autumn evening. My mom called me into the kitchen. She was crying. She said my brother Leo was about to start college, but the savings they had for him was gone. They had used it to cover living expenses for the past year. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, and said the words that nailed the final nail in the coffin of my future. "I know this is too much to ask, but Leo is our family's only hope. You're his big sister. Can you help him?" How could I say no? It was my brother, the family's hope. And just like that, I took it all on. The mortgage, the car payments, the utilities, and now, over $2,000 a month for Leo's tuition. In total, more than $5,000 left my account every month before I could even buy myself a cup of coffee. My life became a loop. Wake up, work, get paid, transfer money. I stopped dating, stopped traveling, stopped saving. I had become the private bank of the Miller family. Every time I tried to start a conversation about tightening their spending, about dad finding any job, even a low-paying one, his rage would erupt. "You think I'm not trying? You think I want to take money from my own daughter? What does your little computer-clicking job know about a man's humiliation?" And my mom, as always, would step in to smooth things over. "Come on, Chloe, your father's stressed. Let it go. We're a family." Family. They kept using that word like a shield to hide their dependency and a chain to bind me. And I, foolishly, believed them. I didn't know I had just signed myself up for a 5-year prison sentence for my own future. A sentence that, unbeknownst to me, was about to get a whole lot worse. 5 years passed in a hazy blur. My life had been frozen at age 23, while my friends, Jess and the others, were buying houses, getting married, getting promotions, and living the lives I was supposed to have. Me, I was stuck. Every day was a copy of the last, an endless cycle of work and responsibility. My father's bitterness had become part of the air in the house. My mother's anxiety was a constant, looping soundtrack. And my sacrifice, it had become a given, an unquestioned fact of life, like the sun rising in the east. And then one day, a new crack appeared in our family's already rotten foundation. My dad's old car broke down. This time, it was truly beyond repair. A reasonable problem, right? A legitimate need. But in Frank Miller's mind, this wasn't a problem to be solved. It was an opportunity. I started seeing him spending hours online, not looking for a reliable used sedan, but for trucks. Big, shiny steel monsters, Ford F-150s, Ram 150s with roaring engines. They were symbols of power, of masculinity, of everything he had lost. "Dad, these are too expensive," I had cautiously suggested. "We could find something more reasonable." He shot me a look of contempt. "What do you know about vehicles? A man needs a decent truck." My mom quickly added, He's just looking, honey. Your dad needs something to take his mind off things. A few weeks later, they approached me. Not for money. Their plan was more sophisticated than that. That evening, they both sat with me in the living room, a rare show of unity. My father, with a look of feigned seriousness, said he had found a great deal on a nearly new truck. The thing is, he said, my credit isn't great since I lost the job. If you co-sign the loan, the interest rate will be much lower. We'd actually be saving money in the long run. It's just a formality. The responsibility is still all mine. I should have known. I should have seen the waving red flags. A voice in my head screamed, "Don't do it." But I was so tired of fighting. So tired of feeling guilty. And when my mother took my hand, looking at me with pleading eyes, "Please, honey, for the family," I broke. The next day, he handed me a stack of papers at a car dealership. He flipped quickly to the last page, pointing at the blank line. "Just sign here, Chloe. Hurry up, they're waiting." I didn't even get to read what I was signing. The pressure of his gaze, of the salesman's smile, of my own exhaustion, weighed down on the pen. And I signed. 2 days later, it arrived. A gleaming black beast. A Ford F-150 Lariat, the most expensive trim, majestically taking up the entire driveway. The new car smell was overwhelming, the engine letting out a proud roar as my dad started it. He was like a different person. He spent hours polishing the paint, showing it off to the neighbors. He had gotten a piece of his lost kingdom back, and he was reveling in it. Me, I just felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. The truth was revealed a week later, just 2 days before Thanksgiving. It didn't come from an argument. It came silently, in an email. An email from Ford Credit. The subject line read, "Welcome, Chloe Miller. Your loan has been approved." My heart stopped. I opened the email. The words danced before my eyes. "Dear Ms. Miller, welcome to the Ford Credit family. We are pleased to finance your new Ford F-150 Lariat. Your first payment of $978 is due on." There was no mention of co-signer. My father's name was nowhere. Only mine. With trembling hands, I logged into the customer portal using the reference number from the email, and there, on my computer screen, was the entire loan profile. Sole borrower, Chloe Miller. Total amount financed, $60,245. And at the bottom of the page, a digital copy of my signature, shaky and rushed. They hadn't just tricked me. They had stolen my identity. They had chained me to a massive financial boulder and pushed me into the sea. The fatigue of 5 years instantly vanished. The sadness, the disappointment, the guilt. It all disappeared. Only one thing remained, cold, pure, and sharp as a shard of ice. Rage. And I knew this year's Thanksgiving dinner would be the last one we ever had together as a family. Thanksgiving Day arrived, and the house was filled with a cozy falseness. The smell of turkey and pumpkin pie wafted through the air, trying to mask the scent of deceit that had seeped into the very woodwork. Our relatives had arrived. My Aunt Carol, Dad's sister, brought her famous mashed potatoes. My cousins chattered loudly about football and vacations. On the surface, we were the picture-perfect American family. But inside me, a storm was raging. Every smile I forced felt like a tear on my face. Every polite greeting was a lie. I helped my mom set the table, my hands moving mechanically, but my mind was sharpening every word I was about to unleash. I watched my father, Frank Miller. He was in his element. He paced back and forth, hands on his hips, boasting about the new truck's EcoBoost engine, its towing capacity, the way it handled on the highway. He was playing the part of the successful patriarch, and the crowd was eating it up. He had no idea the curtain was about to be torn down. We all sat down at the table. My father said grace, thanking God for the blessings the family had received. I almost laughed out loud. The first few minutes of conversation passed safely. The weather, everyone's jobs, the kids' school grades, a false peace. I was patient. I waited. And then, the moment came. Aunt Carol, with all the innocence and goodwill in the world, turned to my dad and said, "Frank, I have to say, that new truck is a real beauty. Must have set you back a pretty penny. Business picking up again for you?" That was it. My cue. All eyes turned to my dad, who puffed out his chest in pride, ready to launch into a speech about his success. But I didn't give him the chance. "You should ask me, Aunt Carol," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was cold and sharp, and it cut through every other sound in the room. "Because it's his truck." I paused, looking directly into my father's eyes, which were beginning to narrow in confusion. "But it's my debt." A silence fell over the dinner table. It was so heavy you could hear the cranberry sauce congealing in its bowl. Aunt Carol blinked, bewildered. My mother quickly put her fork down, her face turning pale. "Chloe," my father growled, a warning in his voice. "Don't talk nonsense. This isn't the time." "It's not nonsense," I replied, my voice still even. "It's a $60,000 loan in the name of Chloe Miller. 4.7% APR, 72-month term. I have the email from Ford Credit right here if you'd like to see it." "You?" He started but then choked on the word. His face went from red to purple. For the first time in years, I saw panic in his eyes, the panic of being exposed. My mother quickly tried to intervene, her voice trembling. "Come on, you two. Let's just eat and talk about this later. Everyone is watching." "No, Mom. There is no talk about this later," I said, turning to her now. "I've been quiet for too long. I've paid for this house. I've paid for the cars you drive. I've paid for Leo's education so he could have a future. I have sacrificed 5 years of my life. I asked for only one thing in return: honesty. But what did you do, Dad? You stole my identity to satisfy your own ego." Everything exploded. "How dare you talk to me like that?" my father roared, slamming his fist on the table so hard the dishes jumped and a wine glass tipped over, spilling a dark red stain across the pristine white tablecloth. "After everything I've done for you? I raised you. I put food on the table." "You haven't done anything for me in 5 years, I yelled back, the dam of my repressed fury finally bursting. "I'm the one who's done everything. I'm the one who has carried this family while you sat around feeling sorry for yourself and refusing to face reality." The truth, naked and brutal, was laid bare for everyone to see. My father, with no way out, with no words left to defend himself, resorted to the last weapon of a tyrant: expulsion. He shot up from his chair, sending it clattering behind him. He pointed a finger straight at my face. "You are a useless, selfish parasite. Get out of my house. Get out and never come back." The room was silent, except for his heaving breaths. I looked at him, then at my mother, who had her head bowed over her plate, her shoulders shaking, but she said nothing to defend me. She had chosen her side, and in that moment, I knew the battle was over. I slowly stood up. I calmly placed my linen napkin next to my plate. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I looked around the table at the stunned faces of my relatives. Then I turned and walked away. I heard Aunt Carol call my name, but I didn't stop. I walked out the front door, without looking back. The slam of the wooden door behind me sounded like a gunshot, ending one life and beginning another. The cold air hit me, a shock that was different but no less painful than my father's words. I stood frozen on the porch, one hand still gripping my purse strap, the other clenched into a fist. Seconds ago, I was in a warm, bright room filled with the smell of food. Now I was out here, in the dark, with only the thin sweater I was wearing, I could hear the murmur of conversation from inside the window. It had resumed, as if nothing had happened, as if I had never existed. I walked down the steps, each one feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I went to my car, an old Honda Civic I had paid off myself, and got in. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, in the silence of the car, staring at the house. My house. The house where I was no longer welcome. And then, the emotional dam broke. The hot tears I had held back all evening began to stream down my face. They weren't tears of self-pity, but of rage, of a profound sense of loss. I buried my head in the steering wheel, my body shaking with choked, silent sobs. 5 years. 5 years of sacrifice. 5 years of endurance. 5 years of lying to myself that I was doing the right thing. All of it ending with me being called a parasite and thrown out like trash. My weeping turned into a silent scream in the cramped space of the car. After a long while, when the tears had run dry and only a painful emptiness remained, a thought flickered in my mind. There was still one person, the one I had sacrificed the most for. My brother, Leo. He was smart, sensitive. He would surely understand. He would be on my side. Shaking, I reached for my phone and found his name. I pulled the car over to a quiet side street, trying to take deep breaths so my voice wouldn't break. Hello? Leo's voice came through on the other end, sounding slightly annoyed at being disturbed. Leo, it's me, I whimpered. Chloe, what's wrong? You sound weird. Dad just threw me out of the house, I said, the tears starting again. I told everyone about the truck loan and he went crazy. I expected a word of comfort. I expected outrage on my behalf. I expected him to say, "Where are you? I'm coming to get you." Instead, there were a few seconds of silence, a silence where I could feel the gears turning in his head. And then, Leo spoke, in a completely different tone, one of calculation and panic. Wait, what do you mean? What are Mom and Dad going to do? What about my tuition? Time froze. His question hung in the cold air between us. Not, are you okay? Not, are you safe? But, what about my tuition? And in that instant, something inside of me died completely. My father's betrayal came from pride and anger. It was hot and loud. But this betrayal from Leo, it was worse. It was cold, selfish, and it came from the very person whose future I had given up my own to build. My tears stopped abruptly. The sob in my throat dissolved. The sharp pain in my chest was replaced by a terrifying calm. I understand, I said, my voice now as flat as a lake with no ripples. No, that's not what I meant. Leo quickly tried to backtrack, but it was too late. No, I really do understand. Thanks, Leo. I hung up before he could say another word. The last string tying me to the so-called Miller family had been severed. I no longer owed them anything. Not loyalty, not forgiveness, and certainly not another damn cent. I started the car. My hands were no longer shaking. My vision was no longer blurred by tears. I knew exactly who I needed to call. I scrolled through my contacts, past the names of relatives who had sat silently and watched me be humiliated, and stopped on one name. Jess. I hit the call button. It only rang once. Chloe, where are you? I just heard from Aunt Carol. They're all insane. Jess's voice was worried and angry. I'm okay, I said, surprised at how calm I sounded. I'm on my way to your place. We need to talk. Of course, get over here. The door's unlocked, Jess replied. As I drove down the highway toward Jess's apartment, my mind was no longer in turmoil. It became strangely sharp and focused. I stopped thinking about what I had lost. I started thinking about what had been taken from me, 5 years of my life, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and my identity. A plan began to form in my head. Not a plan to run away. A plan to get justice. They had thrown me out. Fine. But they were about to find out that they had just thrown away the very life raft that had kept their sinking ship afloat for the last 5 years. And now, I was going to be the one to start the storm. Jess's apartment was in the Lakewood neighborhood, a world away from the quiet but suffocating suburb I had just left behind. The moment I walked in, Jess threw her arms around me. It wasn't a hug of pity. It was a hug of protection, of vicarious outrage for her friend. She didn't press me with questions. She simply pulled me inside, handed me a thick wool blanket, and made me a hot cup of chamomile tea. "I've been telling you for years, Chloe," Jess said, her voice tight with anger. "They don't deserve you. This was bound to happen one day, and I'm glad it finally did." Sitting on Jess's comfortable sofa, wrapped in the blanket, I told her everything. Not just about Thanksgiving dinner, but about the phone call with Leo. When I got to the part about my brother asking about his tuition, Jess let out a string of curses. "Unbelievable. That kid. You gave up everything for him," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "So that's it. You are done with that family. Not emotionally, and certainly not financially." She looked me straight in the eye, her expression serious. "So what are you going to do now? You can't just let this go, especially not with that $60,000 loan. He stole your identity, Chloe." The question didn't scare me. On the contrary, it felt like a torch illuminating the path ahead. "I'm not letting them go," I replied, my voice cold. "I'm not just going to stop paying. I'm going to make sure they face every single consequence of their own actions." Jess nodded, a grim smile of approval on her face. "Good. So, where does Operation Scorched Earth begin?" I opened my laptop, its screen glowing in the dim room. My hands were steady now. "First things first," Jess said, leaning over. "You need to freeze your credit. Right now. Go to the websites for all 3 major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. This will prevent anyone, including your dad, from opening any more accounts or loans in your name." It was the first action I took to reclaim control. It only took 15 minutes, but it felt like I had just built the first wall of a fortress to protect myself. Next, we opened my banking spreadsheet. Line after line, the payments from the last 5 years appeared like an indictment. Mortgage, $1,800 a month. 2 car payments, $900. Utilities, internet, phone, $600. Insurance, $400. Leo's tuition, $2,000. We added it all up. The number that appeared made both of us fall silent. Nearly $6,000 a month. Over $350,000 in 5 years. Enough money for me to have bought my own house. Money that had been thrown into a bottomless pit of dependency. "Oh my God, Chloe," Jess whispered, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You've been carrying a fortune on your back." "I know," I replied, "and now it's time to get it back." "Listen," Jess said, her voice more serious than ever. "With that truck loan, this isn't just about family money anymore. This is a crime. You don't need a financial advisor. You need a lawyer. A lawyer who specializes in identity fraud." She was right. This was no time for sentiment. This was time for legal action. I started searching for law firms in Cleveland while Jess took notes. We laid out a clear plan of action. 1. Freeze credit. Done. 2. Gather all financial evidence, bank statements, bills, emails, and especially the truck loan documents. 3. Contact a lawyer on Friday morning, right after Thanksgiving. Present the entire case, including the identity fraud. 4. Draft a formal, lawyer-advised document to send to my parents. 5. Prepare to report the fraud to the police and the credit agencies. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't sleep in my childhood bedroom. I slept on the sofa in Jess's apartment. I didn't dream of arguments or bills. I dreamed of spreadsheets, legal documents, and a clear path forward. My storm wouldn't be a blind rage. It would be a calculated, precise, and unstoppable force. They had chosen to start this war, but I was going to be the one to end it, too. The next morning, I woke up on Jess's sofa. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up with the crushing weight of responsibility. Instead, it was a different kind of heaviness, the solemnity of a mission. It was Black Friday. While millions of Americans were hunting for bargains, I was starting a hunt of my own. A hunt for justice. With a hot cup of coffee made by Jess in hand, I sat in front of my laptop. The screen didn't display shopping websites. It displayed a list of law firms in Cleveland with search filters for financial fraud, identity theft, and civil litigation. Jess sat beside me, not saying much, just silently scrolling on her phone, her presence a quiet source of strength. I knew I couldn't wait until Monday. Every passing hour was another hour they lived under the illusion that things would go back to normal, that my tantrum would pass. I found a law firm that offered emergency phone consultations. I took a deep breath and dialed the number. A professional female voice answered. I briefly explained my situation, without the emotional frills, just the facts. 5 years of financial support, the illegal $60,000 loan, and being kicked out of the house. On the other end of the line, the woman, who introduced herself as Attorney Davies, listened patiently. She wasn't shocked by the family drama. She focused only on the events. When I finished, she spoke with a firm and completely non-judgmental tone. Ms. Miller, she said, I want you to understand this very clearly from the outset. Legally, this is not a family issue. This is a case of deliberate credit fraud and identity theft. The financial support you provided them in the past does not grant them any right to do this. You have every right to protect yourself and seek recourse. Hearing those words from a legal expert felt like an invisible weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was the victim of a crime. Attorney Davies continued with clear advice, reinforcing the plan Jess and I had outlined. Your first step of freezing your credit was absolutely correct. Your next step must be to cease all verbal communication. From now on, everything must be in writing, preferably via email to have a timestamp. This is crucial as evidence. And regarding the truck loan, she added, we will draft a formal letter of demand. Give them a specific deadline, say 14 days, to refinance that loan into their own names. If they fail to comply, we will proceed with filing a police report and a civil suit. You've done well to gather your evidence. Keep doing so. After the 30-minute call, I felt like I had been fitted with a new suit of armor. I was no longer the hurt daughter. I was a client, with the law on my side. That entire afternoon, I sat and drafted the most important letter of my life. It contained no accusations or emotional recounts. It was a dry, direct, and unmistakable document. It covered 3 main points. 1. A notification that, effective November 29th, 2024, I, Chloe Miller, would be ceasing all automatic payments from my bank account for all bills related to their home address, including but not limited to the mortgage, electricity, water, gas, internet, and other services. They would have to set up their own payment methods. 2. A formal demand that the Ford F-150 loan, VIN number, which was fraudulently taken out in my name, must be refinanced or paid in full within 14 days. Failure to do so would leave me no choice but to pursue necessary legal action. 3. A requirement that all future communication from them to me must be conducted via email to a new address I had set up for this purpose. All calls or text messages would go unanswered. I printed the letter out, along with a copy of the Ford credit email and bank statements highlighting my massive payments. I put it all in a large envelope. At the end of the day, I drove to the post office and sent the envelope via certified mail with a signature requirement. That was for legal assurance. But I knew they wouldn't wait for the letter to arrive. Back at Jess's apartment, I sat down and opened my laptop. I scanned all the documents into a single PDF file. I opened a new email. Attached the file. In the recipient line, I typed in both my mother's and my father's email addresses. The subject: important notice regarding financial and legal matters. I stared at the send button for a long moment. This was it. There was no going back. This was a declaration of war. And then, with a slow exhale, I clicked. The email was sent. Somewhere in Cleveland, in the house I once called home, a ticking time bomb had just been delivered to their inbox. And I knew the silence wouldn't last long. After the email was sent, a strange silence fell over Jess's apartment. Neither of us spoke. We just sat there, staring at the now dark laptop screen, as if waiting for a lightning bolt to strike from a clear sky. I knew my parents had a habit of checking their email every evening. It wouldn't be long. And I was right. About 20 minutes later, my phone, which was lying face down on the coffee table, began to vibrate. First, it was a text, then another. Then it began to vibrate continuously, nonstop, the screen lighting up with a barrage of incoming calls. Mom. Dad. Mom. Mom. Dad. It buzzed like a wounded animal, desperate for attention. Jess and I just looked at it. I had no intention of touching it. This was my first boundary, and I wasn't going to break it. When the calls went unanswered, the text messages began to flood in. The first was from my mother. Chloe, I don't understand this email. Is there some mistake? What is this legal document? What are you doing? Call me immediately. A few minutes later, another text. Chloe, why aren't you picking up? Your father is reading the email and he's furious. You can't do this. We're a family. Then came my father's texts. His words held no plea, only rage and empty threats. What the hell do you think you're doing? You have no right to cut anything off. I'll sue you for breach of contract. You're going to regret this. I read those words and felt nothing but bitter irony. He was threatening to sue me, while he was the one who had committed a crime. Jess looked at me, her eyebrows furrowed. Are you okay? I'm better than ever, I replied. And it was the truth. Seeing their panic, their powerlessness now that they couldn't manipulate me over the phone, I felt a cold sense of empowerment. And then, the first real domino fell, in a small but meaningful way. A new text from my mother appeared, her tone having shifted from confusion to real panic. Chloe, Netflix and all the other TV channels aren't working. The screen says there's a payment error. Did you forget to pay? Can you fix it? Your father is screaming because he's missing his game. I showed the phone to Jess. She read it and let out a humorless, satisfied laugh. Oh, so it begins, she said. His game? He's about to miss a lot more than a football game. It was a small victory, but it proved one thing. My actions had immediate consequences. My power wasn't in shouting back at them. It was in the unsubscribe button. While my phone was still buzzing with angry calls and texts, a call from a different number appeared. Aunt Carol. I hesitated for a second, then decided to answer, putting it on speaker. Hello? Chloe, it's me. Aunt Carol's voice came through, sounding a bit rushed. Your parents just called me, screaming on the phone about some legal email. I don't really understand what's going on, and frankly, I don't want to hear your brother's version anymore. I just wanted to call and ask, are you okay? A warmth spread through my chest. I'm okay, Aunt Carol. Thanks for asking. Good, she said. Listen, I don't know what you did, but after what I witnessed at Thanksgiving, I just want to say, I believe you. And if you need anything, a place to stay, a meal, or just someone to talk to, call me. I told her briefly and factually about the $60,000 loan. There was a silence on the other end. Then she let out a word I had never heard from her before. My God, Frank. He's gone too far. I'm so sorry, Chloe. I'm sorry I didn't realize it sooner. That phone call was everything I needed. Confirmation from a family member that I wasn't crazy, that I was in the right. After hanging up, I looked out the window. Night had fallen over Cleveland. I had survived the first assault. I had an ally. And somewhere in this city, in the house that was no longer mine, my parents were getting their first taste of reality. The streaming services were just the beginning. The much larger dominoes, the mortgage, the car payment, the utilities, were still standing, ready to fall at my command. The battle had only just begun. The weekend passed in a tense silence. The storm of texts and calls subsided, replaced by an ominous quiet. I knew this wasn't acceptance. This was them regrouping, forming a new plan after their initial efforts failed. Jess and I used that time to fortify my defenses. We changed the passwords on all my accounts and set up two-factor authentication. Each small step was another brick in the fortress I was building around my new life. On Monday morning, I decided it was time to push the next domino, one that directly affected their ability to communicate and manipulate. I logged into the family phone plan account that I had been paying for years. With a few clicks, I made a crucial change. I split my parents' phone numbers off from my unlimited data plan, transferring the payment liability for their 2 lines to them, under the most basic pay-as-you-go plan. This meant that from now on, for every megabyte of data they used, they would have to pay for it themselves. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a panicked text from my mom. Chloe, my phone says I'm out of data. I can't get on the internet. I can't use my maps. What's happening? I didn't reply. I just screenshotted the message and saved it to a folder labeled Evidence. When they realized they could no longer reach me through digital means, they resorted to the last tactic of those who have lost control: direct confrontation. That afternoon, as Jess and I were reviewing documents for the lawyer meeting the next day, there was a knock at the door. Not a polite knock. A series of loud, rapid, and demanding bangs. We looked at each other. My heart started pounding in my chest. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. Jess signaled for me to stay put. Then she walked to the door, but didn't open it. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "It's Frank and Susan Miller." My father's voice roared from the hallway. "We know Chloe's in there. Open this door." "Chloe doesn't want to speak with you right now," Jess replied through the closed door. "You received the email. All communication from now on must be in writing. Please leave." "You little brat! You've brainwashed my daughter!" my father screamed, his voice echoing in the hall. "Chloe, I know you can hear me. Open this door before I break it down." I sat frozen on the sofa, my hands clenched. I was terrified, but at the same time I felt a strange pity for him. A man who was once the king of his own world, now reduced to screaming in a hallway like a rejected child. Jess didn't flinch. "I will call the police if you are not gone in 1 minute," she said clearly. After a few more curses, we heard their heavy footsteps retreating. They had backed down. I had successfully defended my first physical boundary. But their fight had just moved to another front. That evening, Aunt Carol called me again. Her voice was full of concern. "Chloe, your father just called me and all the other siblings. He's telling a completely different story. He's saying you suddenly went crazy over money, that you're being influenced by bad friends, and that this Jess girl is holding you hostage. He didn't mention a single word about the truck loan." "I knew he would do that," I sighed. "Don't worry," Aunt Carol said, her voice becoming determined. I didn't let him have the stage. I told everyone the truth that you told me. I even forwarded them your email. With the sensitive info blacked out, of course. Now everyone knows your side of the story. Your father is isolating himself. Her words were like a balm. My father's attempt to control the narrative had backfired. He was not only losing my financial support, but also the respect and trust of his own family. I hung up, a weary but steady feeling washing over me. They had survived losing Netflix and mobile data. They had failed at direct confrontation, but the biggest domino had yet to fall. I looked at the calendar. It was only a few days until the first of the month. That was the day the mortgage payment was due, and that would be a notification they could not ignore. The first day of December arrived quietly. To the world, it was just another day, but to me, it was Emancipation Day. For the first time in 5 years, I opened my banking app and didn't see a massive, near $6,000 chunk of my money automatically disappear. My entire paycheck was still there. Mine. The feeling was strange, almost unreal. I could start saving. I could make an extra payment on my student loans. I could breathe. Meanwhile, in the house across town, I could imagine a different kind of silence. The silence of waiting and flickering hope. Perhaps they thought I was just bluffing. Perhaps they believed that at the last minute, a daughter's instinct would kick in, and I would quietly pay the mortgage to save them. They were wrong. Confirmation came about a week later. Not in an angry text, but in an official letter. My mother took a picture of it and sent it to me, with no words, just a single, large question mark. It was a notice of delinquent payment from the mortgage bank. The words were in bold, cold print: payment overdue, risk of foreclosure. Immediately after, a series of desperate texts from my mother began. Chloe, the bank sent a letter. They say we're late on the house payment. You really didn't pay it? Chloe, we're going to lose the house. Your father is a wreck. You can't do this to me. What did I do wrong? That last question, what did I do wrong? It no longer made me feel guilty. It just made me tired. She was wrong to stand by and watch me be financially and emotionally abused for 5 years. She was wrong to choose silence over defending her daughter at Thanksgiving dinner. I forwarded her text to my lawyer, as instructed. I did not reply. But the most spectacular domino to fall wasn't the house. It was the symbol of my father's pride. The $60,000 truck loan, of course, was also past due. And auto finance companies are not as patient as banks. The news came to me in a call from Aunt Carol, her voice a mix of shock and the morbid excitement of someone witnessing high drama. Chloe, you are not going to believe this, she said. They just repossessed Frank's truck. In the middle of the day, in front of all the neighbors. A big tow truck showed up, a man holding a clipboard. He tried to argue with them, shouting that it was his truck. But they just pointed to the paperwork and said, "Sir, the loan is in the name of Chloe Miller, and it is delinquent." It was quite a scene. The whole neighborhood came out to watch. I sat in silence, picturing it. The gleaming black truck, my father's pride and joy, being unceremoniously towed away. That public humiliation was more painful than anything I could have said. It was justice, served by a completely impartial third party. News of the potential foreclosure and the repossessed truck sent shockwaves through the extended family. This time, the call was from my Uncle James, Dad's younger brother, who had been silent at the dinner. His voice was worried. "Chloe, I heard what happened. This has gone too far. Losing a house is a serious thing. He's your father after all. Is there any way we can all sit down and work this out?" This was the final test. The pull of kinship, of family pressure. But now, I had my armor. "I understand your concern, Uncle James," I replied calmly, repeating the words my lawyer had prepared for me. But this situation is a direct result of their choices over many years, culminating in my father committing fraud against me. The only path to resolution is for them to face the consequences and take responsibility themselves. I will no longer be a part of that process. My boundary is clear. Uncle James sighed on the other end. He had tried, but he knew he couldn't move me. Their last attempt to use family pressure had failed. The biggest pieces had fallen. The truck, the symbol of the lie, was gone. The house, the stage for our family tragedy, was on the brink of collapse. They could no longer look to me for a way out. They could only look at each other, and at the wreckage they had created for themselves. And I wondered, with no one left to blame, with no one left to cling to, what would they do next? The biggest dominoes had fallen. What followed wasn't silence, but a series of chaotic and desperate maneuvers on their part. But I was outside of it all. On my lawyer's advice, I had filed the identity fraud report regarding the truck. This protected my credit score from that debt, but it was also an official legal action against my father. I didn't know, nor did I ask, what legal consequences he faced. That was the path he had chosen. Time passed, 6 months, then a year. My life and their lives veered in completely opposite directions. I kept in touch with Aunt Carol, and through her, I got the full picture of their new reality. They couldn't save the house. With a delinquent mortgage and no income to make up for it, they were forced to sell it at a loss to avoid a full foreclosure. From a spacious 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, they moved into a cramped 2-bedroom rental apartment in a much louder neighborhood. That reduction in living space was a tangible, daily symbol of their downfall. Harsh reality had forced them to do what they should have done 5 years earlier. They had to get jobs. My father, Frank Miller, the once proud foreman, was now working part-time at a Home Depot. I could imagine his humiliation at having to wear the orange apron and show customers to the plumbing aisle. My mother, after years of being a homemaker, found a full-time job as a receptionist at a dental clinic. Aunt Carol said she looked tired, but in a different way. It was the exhaustion of labor, not of constant anxiety. For the first time in years, they were living on their own money. While they were learning to live with less, I was learning to live with more freedom, more peace, and more money in my bank account. With the financial burden lifted, my career soared. I got a promotion. I paid off 1/3 of my student loans. I built an emergency fund that could cover 6 months of living expenses. And 6 months ago, I did something I once thought was impossible. I was approved for a mortgage on my own condo, a place no one could ever kick me out of. But the biggest change wasn't in my bank account, it was in me. I had started going to therapy, a difficult journey to untangle the knots of codependency and guilt that had been ingrained in me for years. I learned to recognize my own worth, not through sacrifice, but through self-respect. I thought my story with my family had ended there. I had accepted that my father, with his immense pride, would likely never admit his wrongdoing. But then one day, a handwritten letter arrived at my office. My mother's handwriting. The letter wasn't long. It wasn't filled with maudlin words or excuses. It was a confession. My mom wrote that the past months had been the hardest of her life, but also the most honest. She admitted that losing everything had forced her and my dad to look at themselves. "I used to be so angry at you," she wrote, "but now I understand that what you did wasn't cruel. It was necessary. I was wrong to enable your father's behavior. I was wrong to place that burden on your shoulders. I am sorry, not for what happened, but for my role in it." At the end of the letter, she didn't ask me to come back. She just wrote, "If you are ever ready, I would like to build a new relationship with you. A relationship between 2 adults, based on respect, not dependency." After talking it over with my therapist, I called her 2 weeks later. We met for coffee in a public, neutral place. The meeting was awkward, with long silences, but it was a start. A fragile but real start. My story has an imperfect ending, but it's a realistic one. My relationship with my father will likely never be healed. My relationship with my mother is being rebuilt, carefully, one brick at a time. If you are listening to this story and you see a part of yourself in it, I want you to know this. Boundaries are not selfish. They are necessary self-preservation. Helping and enabling are two completely different things. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face their own consequences. My journey was painful, but it led me to a life that is authentic, free, and stable. A life I built myself, for myself. Thank you for listening.